Good evening, everybody. System Chalk here with the 9th episode of the Dancer Legacy for Cultist Simulator. Now, this is a little odd for me because I am recording this episode. I know that this is going to be going live on Monday, and I sort of know about something that's coming up, which I'm not able to talk about, but by the time I normally release these things, it's already going to be open news. So if all things are going well, I should be streaming on the Steam page for this game, Cultist Simulator. And generally the way these things work, I'll probably have been streaming for a few hours, but if you happen to be watching this within the first few hours of it being released, you'll probably have a chance to catch me live, and I normally do another YouTube video to announce this sort of thing. Now, the reason I'm talking about this here is not just to drum up some views, although please, if you happen to want to catch me and you watch the channel, feel free to let yourself be known. It's always a delight to see some familiar faces. But there's been a bit of a change in the back end for Cultist Simulator, and I used to have a trick which would make sure that I'm able to sort of get through one of those streams and make sure that I don't lose my saves. And there's a couple things that I've noticed about the way that the saves have been working lately that may have changed that trick. So I need to allow for the possibility that agreeing to do this. Now I'm going to be doing this event one way or the other because I'm getting paid for it, which is very nice of Weather Factory. But it does create a difficulty in terms of these regular broadcasts because there's the possibility that I may have to end this sequence early or that I'll lose the progress. That does not have implications for how it's going to end this week. I'm going to play like I normally do, but I wanted to maybe give a little bit of a warning ahead of time that it is possible that this one may suffer something of an abrupt end. I have a couple of ideas of how I'd handle a situation like that. But it was a chance for me, one, to talk about the event that's probably going on at the time that some of the people are going to be watching this video based on sort of the stats of how the other videos work. And I just wanted to be upfront about that. I will also say something on Friday's video, which is probably going to be the last one that I can record this weekend. But we're going to focus on today. And so let's just take a quick look at where we're at in terms of the main screen. And then we'll sort of figure out our next few steps. One thing that's actually worth talking about here is, and I kind of like how this has turned out in a story way, although it's a little inconvenient as far as gameplay is concerned. Margaret has a lot of mentors and patrons, and there's this interesting distinction between the mundane, Lord Timothy Mundy and Nicole, 4th Marchioness of Stanford. As well as, some of the people who may be tied to the occult world, Count Jannings, Popula Cells, Dr. Ibn Aladim, figures like that. But there's very few followers, and in fact, one of the things that's probably... It's hard to say that expeditions aren't important for anyone, but I would say that probably for the dancer, expeditions are more important than the others. And so we are probably further away from the sorts of progress that we would want to make than we would normally be, even with my somewhat slow pace. So that's going to be something that I keep in the back of my mind as I play the game. Originally, I was a little more reluctant to doing things like peculiar rumors or talking about lore fragments because this is something that would potentially bring up an investigator. Well, now we have an investigator, and so in this case here, I can at least afford to be generating some mystique. I might want to be a little bit more careful so far as notoriety is concerned. But that's going to be how we sort of fill our ranks. And then, of course, moving forward, we have lots of books, so I'm going to be reading those, but I am still going to be visiting the auction house in order to get whatever remaining books I can, because, of course, there's still a ton of work to be done as far as getting through my existing texts. And, of course, the nice side effect of that is going to be that I'll be able to get things like erudition and glimmerings and generally be able to improve my various stats. Final thing I'm going to do before we unpause is just take a quick quick look at what's going on. So we've got the auction going on. We're translating. We've got a season of suspicion coming up, so don't want to be generating any notoriety. We're healing, and we are looking for more people. If I have a preference, I definitely want to try and get the passion built up before I get my any of my other stats built up, because of course passion is something that will be taken up by the talk verb, but I also will potentially need it for my private engagements or the gaiety. Now, with that in mind, the gaiety is the one that's expiring sooner, so we're gonna take care of the contract there. The stage awaits, hot and clean and bare and bright. If I move the moves and step the steps and do what is required, they'll pay me. 45 seconds there. The auctioneer makes a note of my name and signals one of the attendants. I have my prize. I hope it's worth it. Okay, so we're going to keep going to Oriflammes. Looks like I've got my troubles with the UI again, but we'll get through it. The crowd of pinched faces, glinting eyes. Who will bid? In this case, it's Gartside's Latin grammar. Now, you know, I can buy it again, but there's really no advantage to me doing it. The best I can do is hope to make my money back. But it's also possible that it will sell for something less than what it's worth. Alright, so that's another case of mistaken identity there. It's interesting, it feels like the Course of the Heart tends to, I don't think it's always generated, but it really does feel like it's got a higher chance of triggering when I'm healing. Okay. Yep. Well, again, I think I said I'm gonna carry on the. Here we go. I should be working out the order a little bit differently. All right, we're gonna do this properly. There we go. We will read Kerner and Gut, and again, that's just to be able to get the Greek and to do these other translations. Of course, I have a little Greek already, but I'll need more than a little. And it looks like either I missed it, or there just simply wasn't an event for me to do something a little bit more. I can live with that, though. I'm less inclined to, well. Yeah, we can afford to go back to the wood. Oops. But we do need to deal with our benefactor. Alright. My benefactor would be delighted if I'd offer a private performance for a small and refined audience. They'll invite me to dinner afterwards, and of course offer suitable gifts in return for my time. Alright, so we knew this was coming up. We won't worry too much about what's coming. We won't worry too much about the investigation unless we somehow generate a notoriety. But I know how to kind of keep out of trouble for a little while. And we've got a season of Ardors coming up, so that's going to mean some contentment for me. So here we go, and we'll see what the auction house brings up. Because of the way I've laid out the board, I'm a little more likely to miss items. Okay, another language book, so not as important to me. My own heart pumps more strongly today. Now, there was a reason why I originally brought Rhaenyra into the Wildwood Club. But in this case, I've decided to go to the auction house a little more often, partly just because of the what the books will ultimately give me. But there is specifically going to be something that I try and get from Rhaenyra. We perch on alarming Rietveld chairs in a windowless auction room with vividly burnt orange walls, waiting for the auctioneer to announce what he's offering. The reek of new paint makes the brain spin. And... oh, interesting. Is my benefactor about to propose? All right. My benefactor would be delighted if I'd offer private performance for a small, refined audience. They'll invite me to dinner afterwards, and of course offer suitable gifts in return for my time. They have an air of suppressed excitement tonight. Aspect proposal from a benefactor. In a moment of passion, my benefactor has proposed marriage. If I seize the moment and accept, this will transform my life and close other doors forever. Talk to the benefactor before their enthusiasm wanes. Okay, so we can go back to the gaiety, or we can deal with Nicole. We will continue our day job. The stage awaits, hot and clean and bare and bright. If I move the moves and step the steps and do what is required, they'll pay me. Alright, so we do have Moth event coming up, but I'm also interested De Bellis Murorum, which I do not believe we have a copy of right now, so we will throw a little money at it, and we can learn from one another. So let's just take a look here. We've got old and happy far off things, so in this case I believe this should be generating restlessness, but I have noticed I've been wrong on that in the past. So if I want, accept the proposal of marriage. I've been offered marriage into the nobility, peace, prosperity, comfort, and the affectionate companionship of my benefactor for the remainder of my life. I must be sincere. If I cannot experience sincerity, I must manufacture it. So we've got 3 minutes to basically have comfort. But this is actually the first dancer ending that I got, but I don't have the achievement for it because I don't think it was implemented at the time. Anyways, we will continue to talk about esoteric matters. I want to try and get the some more people in the organization. Okay, so again, I was mistaken on this before. So once upon a time, I used to rely on the fact that the game would show you what came out of the other location. But I believe in this case here, I just have to pick a card and I'll never know what was behind the other one. Now this one, I know the well will sometimes give you vitality. I'm actually trying to go for glimmerings right now, and I don't recall if one is more likely than the other to produce glimmerings. I think I'll do the Temple of the Wheel again just because I'm a little less familiar with it. In this case, we got a subtle flaw. Laces uncoil, windows swing open, locks move as if oiled. Last night I came to the wood in the high jagged rock called the Temple of the Wheel. Its flank, patched with black lichen and eye signs, opened like a mouth beneath my hands, and I walked in the whispering space within. The gods who were stone, the first of the hours, are almost all gone now, but here their voices remain. Wheel, flint, tide, and others without names. Okay. So a determined and distinctive tongue, but I have the measure of it. Greek. No doubt you're conversant with every variety of Greek, from the beginning to Byzantium, but it's a good thing that you have all those reference works. I don't know if I ever read the Latin description, but I quite like the descriptions in here. Latin, dead language, dead as diamonds. Alright. On what is contained by silver? A bestiary by Pomander in Greek, and I should have tried translating instead of reading. Lock the study door, the work begins. Okay, so there's no way to get passion back in an early way, so we can't go back to the wood for a while. But I suppose we can try and get our health back a bit faster. And Season of Visions is coming up, so I want to mind my manners as far as fascination is concerned. Another bidder. Someone else has matched my bid. I must match it with more funds or forego my prize. Well, we've got all of that Monday money, so we will we'll make sure that we get a decent return. Now, we kind of have to hope that the Gaiety Theater gives me an opportunity to really show my stuff, because I do want to use my restlessness here. No! Alright. So I think I'm going to have to deal with the possibility that this is going to turn into Dread. I don't have enough time with Nicole in order to be able to paint this away. So we will take our health. We will pay for the makeup. My benefactor would be delighted if I'd offer a private performance for a small and refined audience. They'll invite me to dinner afterwards, and of course offer suitable gifts in return for my time. Now the contentment's not going to help me with this restlessness, so this is going to be some dread that's sitting around for a little while, but we'll find a way of working through it. Dream-wise, I don't think there's anything I can do. Well, 44 seconds? Yeah, we can afford to go back to the wood. The auctioneer makes a note of my name and signals one of the attendants. I have my prize. I hope it was worth it. It's always worth it. The one thing I'm really worried about, I'm sure most of you have already noticed this, but again, the videos are intended for everyone. So if you haven't picked up on the convention, there are some games, there are some books which are, or cards rather, that are unique and others which are not. So some of these are fairly intuitive. It would make sense that health is not a unique card because you can have more or less of it. Funds also is not a unique card because, of course, you can be more or less wealthy. On the other hand, it is maybe reasonable to think that there is only one Dr. Ibn Aladdin. It's also fair to say that perhaps there is only one Ecdysis Club or one Morelands. You can imagine that there would be multiple copies of Gartside's Sanskrit Reader. And I suppose when it comes down to it, you could say it's like, well, clearly books are intended for wider distribution. I certainly understand there's the idea of sort of lost or rare works. So, you know, if you think of, you know, Plato, I guess we have basically, we think we have everything. And there's fairly good reason to think we have everything. But maybe if we were to find, you know, a lost work by Aristotle, I mean, take your pick, really. But, you know, you could maybe imagine that as, you know, if you were to be the one to find it, you know, you would be in possession of the unique copy of this lost work. But I always kind of take it for the books that the idea here is that they're unique because essentially the knowledge that they can provide, you really only get that once, right? You can read the Viennese Conundrum many times, you can study it very closely, but ultimately its insights into Moth are unique. You're only ever going to be able to get that once. Now, with that in mind, that's technically not true, because if you were to somehow wind up with another copy of the Viennese Conundrum after reading it, you actually do wind up with the extra Moth. So, in fairness, like my interpretation probably isn't that sound as far as the mechanics of the game is concerned, but it's how I like to think about it. And obviously, when you're playing the game, it's up to you to decide what how you want to interpret all of this. But the way you can distinguish between the two is there's sort of this blue and white gradient on the unique cards, the ones that when there's a duplicate, the old one will be burned up, as opposed to the ones which are not unique. So in this case, you'll notice that the Silver Spintrea, the collection of essays, the collection of poetry, the lore, all of these have sort of the plain background, and that means you can have as many as you want. So the reason why this is relevant is that when I am in the auction house, so if I want to maximize the lore that I get, I actually want to make sure that I'm reading these books before I buy them. If, on the other hand, I'm wanting to save money, again, I just want to make sure that I'm not buying a book that I already have a copy of. But one way or the other, I do want to be making sure that if I get, let's say, a copy of On the White show up in Oriflamme's auction house, I know there's a list of what can and can't show up there. But just for the sake of the argument, I'll just pick a random book that I had in the list. If On the White shows up in the auction house, I'm going to want to either ignore it or I'm going to want to buy it. Which is a really long way of explaining, you know, the idea of unique cards. I think for most people this was probably apparent. You know, obviously it mentions can only exist once if you didn't know the definition of unique. But there is actually a visual cue that doesn't involve you looking at the titles of the cards. But with that in mind, because I haven't actually read any of my special books yet, I am at a point where I am checking this rather carefully. Because, of course, I can afford to waste money, which is probably not exactly the sort of thing that somebody working at the Gaiety wants to say too loudly behind, you know, and backstage. But obviously here, I don't want to, you know, I want to be getting the most out of what I've got in my collection. All right, so we now have on what is contained by silver. We'll go back to translating. I am kind of on a bit of a treadmill here because in the end I'm going to be acquiring more books and those are going to involve certain amounts of translating, but some of them are going to be English, so it is possible that I can get that study verb opened up. So here we've got the true and complete accounting of the Asclepian mysteries of the roots of the house, reproduced by one Riley Gress from supposedly a much older text in Greek. Okay, Season of Visions is coming up, and we have a Season of Ambitions, which is going to translate into more restlessness, and of course the possibility of... Oop. Something took my passion. But yeah, the possibility of another Dread coming up. Alright, so both benefactors are getting ready to propose. That's unfortunate. So, one thing I'm curious about, yes, we don't get to add Timothy Monday. So essentially the gravy train is over. So we'll go back to the Gaiety. Stage awaits, hot and clean and bare and bright. If I move the moves and step the steps and do what is required, they'll pay me. The auctioneer makes a note of my name and signals one of the attendants. I have my prize. I hope it's worth it. Alright, we head back. Okay, I think I'm going to go for the occult scrap here, and this is just because I don't actually have that many of them, and I am going to need this for my expedition. So, through the wood. I walked in the wood last night, and the scissors worked in the distance, and furred things crammed my mouth and swarmed my ears, and I felt the old urge to drop to wolf fours and nose among the roots. But I remembered that I walk upright by day, and I know fire and steel and words, and at last I found where the velvet had concealed a secret on tree bark beneath moss. I read it then with the tips of my fingers, and I think now that I could write it in full. And in an occult scrap, secret histories are layered beneath the one that we know, like notes in a rare wine. This is a detail from one of those histories. Okay, so I am going to keep my passion available, just, you know, there's a few things that could possibly be coming up here, although, actually, now that I think of it, I'm still in trouble if we need it at the Gaiety. Okay, we don't need Gartside, so we will just let the time pass. Oh, I should be using this for healing. And we have found Valsine. And a little mystique for... Sorry, just a little mystique for free. I don't know why I tried to talk about the wood. I'm trying to talk about the Wildwood Club. Here we go. Valsine has operated her establishment for almost 20 years. She's never employed an assistant. Her hands are terribly strong. You might be able to recruit this acquaintance as a follower. So we'll add the Wood Whisper, and of course this is one of the nice ways of being able to get rid of influences that you struggle with. You can use, because Dread is an influence. This is one thing that obviously from the start of the playthrough, and particularly for those of you who are new to Cultist Simulator, because I do notice it's actually a delight that whenever I do a new playthrough, it does actually seem that there are some people who have not played the game before do actually find the channel through that. So I realize that some of the veterans don't always appreciate hearing the basics of the game again, but I think there's some value in talking about them. But you'll remember from the beginning of the game I talked about the importance of looking at the different descriptions of cards, and again the important thing here is that dread is an influence, an echo, a resonance, an alignment, something that will fade soon. It's got aspect induces despair, dread participates in edge, it is a memory, and it's ill health. So of course, it's not just heart things that can have ill health aspects. But from a practical matter, trappings of the ceremony, you don't necessarily. So one of the things that's kind of helpful in terms of overcoming puzzles in Cultist Simulator, and I think one of the things that's helpful here is that if I do it on a minor puzzle, it establishes some principles, as opposed to doing it to the later puzzles, where I really don't like the style of like just coming right out and telling people how to solve it. I kind of like to give people a chance to solve things on their own. I actually noticed there was some feedback which was, I mean, it is what it is. Not everything's going to be positive, but it was perceived as me trying to be mysterious. And I mean, that sort of stuff I'm not always that worried about, because in the end, if people are misreading my intentions, or they're deciding to assign intentions that I don't have, I guess there's not a lot that I can do about that. But you may remember that back in the priest run, we were talking about one of the difficulties, and we're like, okay, so this is one of the steps that we're taking. Okay, so we've got a little bit further along the path, and then of course at the end of the video, when it's it really there's no more runway for being able to explain these things. I'm either gonna beat the legacy or I'm not. Then we just come out and say, okay, this is the video where I'm actually going to explain it, so if you still want to work on it, you need to go through here. Or you need to stop watching here and then move on when you've either solved or you're willing to watch a video. In these cases here, I actually find these principles are a little bit easier to talk about, because in the end, nobody's struggling with being able to do recruitment. But what you learn by being able to do things like this, number one, you help people get past something that's a challenge, dealing with dread, for instance. But it also helps you to learn some lessons that will actually help you be able to solve some of the more difficult puzzles on your own. And that's one of the reasons why, even though I've talked about it in the past, I actually think that it can be helpful to spend some time unpacking these things in earlier stages, because in the end, you still allow people to to sink their teeth into the harder mysteries of the game. I do tend to find that there's not necessarily a strong correlation between people who will struggle with, figuring out one small aspect of the game and then being able to solve the later puzzles. Like, to a certain extent, you kind of need to understand how the game presents information to you and how you can manipulate certain things, and sometimes you can just get sort of stuck into certain ruts. So why, I kind of explained why I'm going on at length about this thing, but here's kind of, I think, what the big lesson is about using things like dread in the ceremony. Number one, the first key is to understand that when you are told, okay, you can, for a proper sense of occasion, consumes ingredients and influences uses, but does not consume tools. So there's a few. First of all, the instructions, it says, is like, if you put an ingredient or an influence in here, you lose it, and if you put a tool in here, you don't lose it. So that's just some basic instructions. But in this case here, it's also just saying you can put this in. And now, understanding the consume side of the equation says, oh, okay, so if I put something in here, I lose it. Well, again, I've talked about how I'm quite conservative in terms of how I play, so I don't like losing things, but I sure do like losing negative things. So sure, let's throw that in there. Then, of course, it's also recognizing that dread is not just something to rain on my parade. It is, in fact, an influence, and it is actually something that takes part in, this broader secret world that, manifests itself through things like inspiration and understanding and health. And so, in addition to just being able to read the labels, I think the other thing that this particular trick helps people learn is that just because you assume something should happen that way, it does not mean that the game is necessarily going to treat it that way. And that might seem obvious, but of course, when you're thinking about a game where you are sort of peeling back the skin of the world and seeing what's really there, you are kind of dealing with things that maybe don't work, right? Most of the things that you encounter in the Mansis have sort of a dream logic to it, I guess. And in this particular case here, it's perfectly reasonable to think that because I am a moth cult, I'm not really going to have any need for edge. So basically, unless you happen to be an edge cult, it does not necessarily make sense for you to include dread here. If you're a lantern cult, maybe you'd think that you'd only put fascination inside of it. But there's nothing that the game has actually told us that we can't do that. And of course, this winds up being a very effective way of getting past some influences that can be very dangerous to us. And so what's nice here is that the stakes are very low, right? We know we're going to get Valsine into the cult one way or another. But when you take the time to sort of unpack these sorts of things and understand why they work the way that they do, you get two sets of benefits. One, you can play the game a bit better. You can help solve problems that were maybe troubling you, and you learn some principles that will help you a bit later in order to be able to overcome maybe some of the more complicated challenges. Then you can say, oh, okay, no, I know how to look for the labels of things and understand how they interact. But of course, you also get to tap into some of the themes that I think are really interesting in this game. And I know I've talked about it at length, so I won't take any longer than I have to here. But the fact that you can actually turn... I actually said this in a reply to a comment recently, that if you think about this game, some of the mental health challenges that you can run into in the form of dread and fascination are things that can actually be channeled into your great purpose or your great work. But it's actually the mundane world, the job, right? Timothy Monday, Nicole, Fourth Marchioness of Stanford, the Ecdysis Club. Well, the Ecdysis Club's a little different. The Gaiety Club, though, or Glover and Glover. These things don't necessarily, they don't have that direct influence on your ability to achieve your overall goals. They are actually quite hostile because they take up time. Whereas some of the things that you experience in the world, and again, sometimes these can be negative things, are actually things that can be channeled towards your work, which is, again, it's something I quite like. I sort of understand that it's probably the perspective of someone who doesn't have to deal with profound unhappiness, or the kind of visions that might be assigned with fascination. I might have a very different perspective on this if I was sort of in the throes of a second level season of despair with dread. But it is one of these things that I do like quite a bit, in terms of not necessarily just always banging down every challenge, right? You don't always kill the Suppression Bureau, and you don't always annihilate, you don't do whatever the cosmic equivalent of annihilating dread is. What you do instead is you use dread towards making, this is going to be very Nietzschean, that which does not kill me makes me stronger, but that you're able to subvert it, and you're able to use it towards something that is more in line with your interests. And obviously that's a particular perspective that I would hope to be able to achieve in my own life. So for those of you who've heard some of this stuff before, I apologize if you feel your last few minutes were wasted, but we've got some books. I am going to have to wrap it up here. Thank you very much for watching. The tomorrow, as always, is the day off, but we will be back Wednesday with another episode of Cultist Simulator. If you did enjoy the video, and you're enjoying the series, please consider subscribing, and of course, leaving a like on the video lets me know you liked it, and it helps the videos get noticed. And I've mentioned a few comments here, so I do like interacting with all of you, and do feel free to leave those comments because I do read them and do my best to respond. Assuming that they're ones that seem to want a response. We'll see you all Wednesday. Have a wonderful evening.